Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Rhiannon. I'm an honours student here at the ANU, and I am so excited to be moderating this panel on tips and tricks for honours success. I would like to begin by acknowledging and celebrating the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet, and by paying our respect to elders past, present, and emerging. The objective of this session is to explore the merits and challenges intrinsic to an honours semester or year. For those seeking a competitive edge in their career, who aspire to become experts in their field, or who are looking to kickstart their pathway to a PhD, honours can be an invaluable opportunity for growth and skill building. Today, we are incredibly privileged to have 5 panellists from diverse multidisciplinary backgrounds, including agriculture, history, physics, law, economics, and statistics. A couple of our panellists are in the thick of their honours years right now, others are pursuing PhDs both here at the ANU and abroad, and some have since taken their skills to industry. Throughout our discussion, we will learn about what inspired our panellists to pursue honours, challenges and wins they encountered throughout the semester or year, and their main takeaways and advice for prospective honours students. Before we begin, I'd like to direct your attention to the Q&A box. If you have any questions throughout the panel, please feel free to submit them via this function, and we will save space at the end of the session to answer them. Okay, in alphabetical order, joining us first this afternoon is Sam Coggins. Sam completed a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture at the University of Sydney in 2017, where he received first-class honours, the University Medal and the Convocation Medal. Since then, Sam has been researching how farmers use digital services through a graduate program at the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, a social enterprise in Myanmar and a Gates-funded evidence review at Cornell. Nowadays, he is completing a PhD at the ANU, where he is supported by the Westpac Future Leaders program. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sam. Next up, we have Eleanor Foster. Eleanor is a Bachelor of Philosophy student here at the ANU, where she is currently completing her honours year in history. Eleanor's research has focused on the intersection of history, museums, and cultural politics, and she is currently exploring the movement of colonial-era Aboriginal Australian objects into international museum collections. Last month, Eleanor published her work on Indigenous policymaking in the Journal of Australian Studies. Welcome to the panel, Eleanor. Third, we have Matt Goh. Matt completed his honours year in physics at the ANU in 2019, graduating with first-class honours, the University Medal and the John Carver Physics Prize. He has since worked in roles spanning theoretical physics research, data science, strategy advisory, and deep tech. Now, Matt is working as a quantum control engineer at ACUR Control and preparing to complete a PhD at the University of Oxford, where he has been selected as a Rhodes Scholar. Thank you for being here, Matt. Emma Roth graduated with an Arts Law double degree last year. Her first-class law thesis, a discourse analysis of judicial understanding in survivor-perpetrated homicides, was awarded the Blackburn Medal for Research in Law for the highest-ranking law honours thesis in 2020. Emma spent the past year working as a Supreme Court Associate and is currently a prosecutor at the ACT Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. Thanks for joining us, Emma. And finally, we have Mitch Scott. Mitch is currently nearing the end of his second honours year at the ANU. Mitch completed his first honours in economics in 2020, during which he developed a theoretical model explaining the searching and matching processes of investors and entrepreneurs and how this determines output and returns on an investment. This year, Mitch is pioneering a new approach to the treatment of panel data. He plans to undertake a PhD in the UK in 2022. Welcome to the panel, Mitch. Okay, we might kick off with possibly the most obvious introductory question. I'm interested to know why each of you decided to pursue honours and how you chose your specific research areas. So Matt, we might start with you.
Cool. So I guess I've always been hoping to pursue a career in sort of further research, always been planning to do a PhD and maybe pursue a career in academia. So honours just seemed like the next logical step, really good opportunity to get to grips with what it means to be an independent researcher and lay the foundations for a successful PhD. In terms of how I ended up in my specific field of research, I guess I just spent a bit of my third year talking to a number of different academics, learning about their research, asking questions about sort of how they supervise honours and the kind of projects they'd have, and eventually just kind of zeroed in on a group and project that was a good combination of my skills, their interests, and a nice supervisor that would be good to work with.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else want to jump in and give their input?
Sure, just kind of similar to Matt. Well, honours was built into my degree, but I was also spent a lot of time thinking about, what project to commit to, especially in the humanities. If you have an individual research project, there's no guarantee that other people are really working in that field that are at the ANU, or that, they're necessarily able to supervise it. But, if you look at things like Australian Research Council grants or funding or like projects, then sometimes you can find someone that aligns with something that you're interested in. So I was really lucky that my supervisor was working with an ARC project that I could kind of join into, which is kind of rare for the humanities, but it's meant that I've been able to work with a really good community of scholars. And I think that the community aspect of the honours is something that, you don't always think about because it's quite a solitary experience, but having the academic community is something that I think really makes it worthwhile.
For me, similar to Eleanor, my honours was embedded in my degree. So I didn't have a choice in undertaking honours, but I could choose to do economics, finance, or statistics. I ended up choosing economics in my first year because it most closely aligned with my career and my postgraduate studies, those aspirations that I had. I actually chose to do a second honours, which I think is a little bit unique, just to try to boost my application for postgraduate studies. I felt like after 4 years at uni, I still hadn't built those relationships with the faculty and the staff to kind of leverage into good references for applying to PhD programs overseas. So I decided to spend another year at ANU studying in statistics and building up those relationships. So that was really important for me.
I think for me, I was a bit dissimilar to Mitchell, Matt, and Eleanor, where I really didn't put much thought into whether I should do honours and what honours I would do. I had to do it as part of my degree, and I put very little thought into what project would really be good for me. And I heavily regret that approach. I really wish I took the approach of Matt, Mitch, and Eleanor of like really putting thought into what would be really the best project for that year and then moving forwards as well.
My approach to honours was a bit different. I did law honours, and at ANU, honours is inbuilt just through all of the assessment throughout the whole degree, but there's no requirement to do a thesis. And if you do a thesis, it's only 6 months or 1 semester. So it wasn't something I always intended to do. It wasn't, I wasn't really attempting to pursue academia or anything, but there was a research project that I'd been interested in for a while, and I knew that there was a particular academic at the College of Law at ANU who had a similar research focus, and so it was just an interesting project that I wanted to have a go at.
So it sounds like for a lot of you there was already kind of a interest in research before you decided to commence honours, maybe with the exception of Emma, and a lot of you also wanted to head down the PhD pathway. Do you think that only students who are committed to pursuing a research career should pursue honours? Are there any kind of circumstances in which students may reasonably choose not to do honours at all? And we might start with you because you're the one who...
Yeah, sure. So I definitely think there's a lot of value in honours without it being for a kind of academia or research-based career purpose. I think probably it's the kind of thing where if you don't have to do honours and you don't think it's relevant to your career and you don't have a particular project that you're really, motivated to do, it might not be for you. But I did it just having something that I was interested in. And I found, especially going into the workforce in the last 18 months, having had completed an honours thesis has been really valuable because it shows to employers, you can time manage, you can have a long-term project, you can, work with other people, you can complete like high level or complex research and be able to produce something out of it. And so I think that's transferable to a lot of industries and a lot of areas of work that isn't necessarily research. So I definitely think there's a lot of broad value in it.
Thanks, Em. Does anyone have anything else to add? Maybe for people who are intending to pursue PhD pathways or are currently heading in that direction?
I actually found that kind of so I've been working as an economist for the last year as well, so I have seen a little bit in how these skills transfer from like the undergraduate study through to the workplace, and it was actually only the kind of advanced topics that we took in our honours year that became relevant in the workplace. So throughout the undergraduate degree, we learnt a lot and kind of touched on all these topics a little bit, but when we went in depth in the coursework in the honours, it was just doing it was that deeper dive that honours gives you that actually was valuable in working as an economist.
Thanks, guys. So going back to what some of you said before, a lot of you have mentioned that you thought quite deeply about your projects prior to honours. How would you recommend preparing for honours? Was there anything that you would have done differently in the lead up?
I would say if you know that your topic is going to include a component of needing ethics approval, to get that started in the November or December before your honours year, because it's a very, very long process that you're not guaranteed to get approval. So you need to kind of think about contingency plans. For example, a recent grad did some oral history interviews and he got permission in the November before starting honours, and that went smoothly. But I only thought about getting ethics approval in the March, and my supervisor said, yeah, that's too time consuming and we're not going to do that. So
I think one thing I'd chime in with is readings are really good. And I found that my supervisors were a bit slow on getting reading material to me until sort of, we'd like started honours. And when they do send you readings, often there'll be, this is a very sciences focused answer, but there'll often be like research papers, which until you're far enough into honours to be, to be good at reading literature, that can sometimes be a really rough start. If available, I'd always say ask for previous honours theses, for PhD theses in the area, because they're always written with usually quite good introductory backgrounds targeted roughly at your level, whereas research papers are really quite hard to digest. So they're a good way to get started on readings and find other things you should be looking at.
Yeah, I'd also chime in that in the humanities, at least, research independence is really important. You're unlikely to get sent readings from your supervisors, unfortunately. So I tried to read a book a week leading up to honours. It definitely didn't happen, but to, try and be self-motivated to read the literature around my topic to kind of give myself a head start.
Thank you. So here's a question that's just come through, and I was intending to save space for them at the end, but this one's quite relevant to the discussion right now. So someone's asked, Sam, specifically, you mentioned that your approach to selecting a project was not as deliberate as the other panellists. Knowing what you know now, how would you approach finding an honours project?
I think what I wish I did at the beginning was clarifying what's sort of the value that I see in an honours project, both in whether to do honours and then also what project to decide. So whether that's contributing to a cause I really believe in, or learning about something I find really interesting, or developing specific capabilities to be able to do stuff later on and create options for the future. I wish I really clarified that. And I think if I had done that, then I wouldn't have spent my honours working in like this soil research project trying to help winemakers in the Hunter Valley make more money. I think, yeah, probably one of the saddest periods of my life was realizing I'd committed a year of my short life to busting a gut on this project I didn't give a shit about. And that was a really tough thing to come to terms to. Honestly, it still delivered a lot for me and was able to shape it in a more valuable direction. So it wasn't a waste of time, but it could have been so much more if I really sort of clarified the why early on.
So kind of piggybacking off that, some of our panelists had already accrued quite a lot of research experience. Some had publications prior to beginning their honours year. Do you think that having previous undergraduate research was important?
I mean, obviously it has been really useful, but I think if you're someone that, writing research essays or conducting lab experiments is your favorite part of your degree so far, there's no reason why you can't just continue to nurture those skills in the honours year. You absolutely don't need, you know, prior publications or conference presentations or anything like that. It's, you know, honours is kind of considered to be a bridge between your undergraduate studies and those other things.
Yeah, I had some publication experience prior to honours, and it was completely different from my experience writing my thesis. So I definitely don't think it's necessary. The only thing that maybe is similar or applicable is that if you're attempting to get something published, you need a degree of originality in order for that to be an appealing to an academic journal. And it's a similar kind of issue with theses, in that generally there has to be a degree of originality for that research to be useful, but I don't think you need the experience to be able to do it.
I would add that in my undergraduate degree, it was all kind of quantitative, you know, coursework throughout the first 3 years. Probably the longest essay I wrote might have been 1,500 words or 2,000 words. There was no research component at all. Yet that was what kind of made honours so great, was that you got to dive into this big research project and really round out those quantitative skills and other parts of the undergraduate degree.
So in this discussion so far, we've kind of already learned a lot about like conceptualizing your honours, deciding which route you want to go down and whether you want to do it at all. But now I thought we could maybe talk a little bit more about supervisors. I know that that's something that's a cause of a lot of stress, potentially for prospective students. And it's also the theme of quite a few of the questions that we're getting through the chat at the moment. So I guess I'm wondering, what do you think the most important thing to consider is when selecting a supervisor?
I'll jump in here if you want. I have done it twice now, so and I've done it in two very different ways. In my first year, going into the economics honours, I kind of had a list of ideas that I was interested in, and then went onto the faculty page and looked for, you know, academics with similar research interests, and sent them emails and went and met with them. In the end, though, I ended up doing kind of a research topic that my supervisor was interested in, not one that I had originally planned and thought about. You know, we had a meeting, we got on really well, and she went, you know, have a look at some of these papers that I've written and think about what some extensions could be. And that was how my first honours project came about. In my second year, I had spent the summer researching panel data methods for some reason. Don't know why I would do that, but anyway, and I kind of knew that there was a hole in the literature that I wasn't sure exactly how I would fill it, but I knew that it was there. And so I sent an email to pretty much everyone in the stats faculty saying, you know, I have this problem that I'd like to solve. I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to solve it, but I'd like to do it. And I was lucky enough to have my current supervisor reply back and say, I'm happy to support you on whatever you want to do. You know, you give me the readings, you give me the literature, and I'll learn about it and help support you with that. So there were two very different approaches to finding supervisors, but both led to really great results, I think.
Yeah, so I guess I'll chime in here. There's kind of two things I want to address. Some of the questions have been asking sort of like, is it important that you get along well with your honours supervisor? And I would say that's kind of almost maybe the most important thing in picking a supervisor. At the start of your honours year, you're not an independent researcher, and they're going to be a mentor that's going to guide you in developing basic research skills. My experience was asking a lot of dumb questions until I had no dumb questions left, and that's just a lot easier to do with someone who's easy to get along with. The other thing was sort of whether like prominent academics or like sort of famous academics are a good option for honours supervisors. It's a bit of a mixed bag. They have more experience to draw on and often can kind of get you into more interesting research, but they're also very time poor. And so you need to weigh that up against maybe the option of a sort of younger academic, a postdoc who has a lot more time and maybe a lot more energy to put into the supervisory relationship. I managed to actually optimize for both. So I went to a more senior academic who then passed me on to be co-supervised by one of his postdocs. And I found having access to both was great if you can pull it off.
I'd just add quickly that the relationship with your supervisor, it's great if you can have constructive conversations with them. I think I have had friends in honours programs who are told by their supervisor what they need to do. You need to research this, you need to look at this and go through this whole process, and it's all laid out for them every step of the way. I think it's important as a person going into honours, you don't have that research experience and you're quite young, but you also have your own ideas. So if you can find a honours supervisor who's like willing to get interested in your ideas and move away from their way of thinking a little bit to help support you, that's super important.
Just on a similar note, something that I found really rewarding with my experience with my supervisor was that I felt like we were similarly invested and enthusiastic in the project, and I found that to be such a great experience to have an academic who has their own research and their own experience get excited about your research and feel like you're working as a team, that it just gave me a lot more motivation, and it kind of gave me more value in terms of how I felt about my thesis, because he was encouraging me in terms of, yes, this has, broader value to this area of research, and this has a contribution to make. So I think if you can maybe direct your inquiries into potential supervisors towards people who seem to have a similar interest in you, even if it's not the exact same topic, that might be a good indication of whether you're able to foster a really positive relationship while you're working on the project together.
I'd also recommend talking to other people in the school, particularly PhD students, because they will know the academic in question and they'll be able to give you their opinions. Maybe they've worked with them, maybe they've, had them teach them in honours or in, coursework. Take everybody's opinions with a grain of salt, but you'll learn, the vibe of each person, how they're respected, their kind of teaching style, whether they're very hands-on or very hands-off. And I would also say that, hands-on versus hands-off, both can be good and both can be bad in their own ways. I think, it just really depends.
So we've learned quite a lot about how important the supervisor-supervisee relationship is, but we have had a question come through around whether it's more important to select a topic that you're interested in or a supervisor who you think you'll get along with. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I think it depends what the honours thesis is for. If for you it's for research training and you envision yourself having a hopefully long career of a lot of diverse research, then I don't see any issue with tacking on to an academic who you get on with and who does interesting work, but it isn't necessarily what you potentially thought you would be doing. If you're doing honours because you have a really clear question about the world that you want to answer, then find someone who can help support that.
Yeah, I guess I kind of spoke to this before and said that I think the relationship with your supervisor is much more important. I guess I'd also add that a good supervisor that you get along well with can make you like something that you hadn't previously looked at. So that's certainly worth factoring into your calculation. I'd also say that a year really isn't that much in research time, and if you go on to do a PhD or something afterwards, it's quite possible to pivot to a different field of research. So I think building fundamental research skills is the most important thing in honours, much more so than what exactly goes into your thesis.
Yeah, and then I think another consideration to add to the mix is that you can often have more than one supervisor, even if they're another informal supervisor. They'll even often allow you to have a supervisor from other institutions or even outside academia. So if you consider that, that can help you avoid a compromise between topic and supervisor, because I think it's pretty hard to make a compromise on either of those things. Both are really important from my perspective.
Great, we might move on to challenges, because I know that that's kind of encompassed within this discussion, and also something that is very much at the forefront of prospective students' minds. So I guess I'd like to know what the biggest challenge that you encountered while undertaking honours was, and whether there's anything you might have done differently throughout the year.
Probably for me, the biggest challenge was I started my thesis in March last year. So I had about a week or so at uni, and then we went into lockdown. It probably didn't have as much of an effect on me as it would for other disciplines, because I wasn't in like a science background where I needed like time in a lab or contact with people. But it did make the research a little bit more isolating. I think in the end, though, I felt like I developed a good routine with my supervisor where we were still in contact every week. And so I still felt supported in that way. And so just developing good routines, and then also trying to create some boundary between your work on your thesis and the rest of your life, even if it's all in the same house, helped with getting through that.
Yeah, I mean, not having access to archives and libraries is difficult with COVID. And, you know, it's akin to not having access to the lab for, you know, those in the sciences. So I would recommend being as organized as possible in trying to get access to the archives when you can. Don't be afraid of contacting as many people as you can who are potentially, you know, work at the archive, you know, reach out, make contacts. And you know, people in the academic community more often than not are super generous with their time. You know, I've had, you know, former students from my supervisor who are at Cambridge photocopy archives for me when they could. And, you know, I've had people in Newcastle do similar things. And because it, you know, it is a community, people are willing to do this, but it's also not the same as actually being in the physical archive. So it's, you know, you have to weigh that up.
My biggest challenge kind of came back to securing a supervisor, and it actually really boiled down to the fact that I didn't know much of the faculty, especially as I went into my first honours year. I was kind of, you know, searching them up on the internet and sending them emails, and I, you know, had full belief that they had no idea who I was, which just made it difficult for me to feel confident about going out and finding a supervisor. My advice to kind of anyone looking to do honours would be that as soon as you know that you're going to be doing that honours, kind of get more involved in university. Like I didn't go to many lectures or you know, ask many questions in consults, or you know, get involved in that way. Yet if I had have done that throughout my first, you know, 3 years, or even just like my third year of undergrad, then I would have already started to build these relationships with the faculty and feel more confident going and finding a supervisor. So I guess my advice there would be that it's kind of never too late to start reaching out and getting involved in kind of the events in your college or your university, and like, you know, email that lecturer that you might want to have as a supervisor next year and go get a coffee with them and chat to them, because, you know, they're human, they love having a chat, and, you know, they're actually generally quite nice and quite approachable once you get to know them.
I think, yeah, another thing I'd chime in with challenges was this was for me, this was the longest project I'd done independently, and I was just so useless at managing time and managing the projects, especially because uni is always so structured, and then honours for me was very unstructured. And so, yeah, I just approached the project management really badly. So I think developing a sort of a time management system is really valuable for your honours year and then just life in general. I'll message in the chat some tools I've found particularly helpful for doing this. And if anyone else wants to chime in with things, feel free to add to it as well.
Did you have a particular challenge? We're just on challenges that we had to overcome during our honours years, and any advice you'd give for people who are reckoning with maybe the same thing?
Probably probably for me, it was just like trying to be organized in a way that I could plan out my research, plan out what the whole period of writing was going to look like, because my thesis was only 1 semester, so you only really had like maybe 3 or so months to research and write everything. So I think it was just trying to like plan out every week, and then within every month, and then throughout the whole period, just so I was, kind of comfortable putting work away at the end of the day, and knowing that I'd still kind of be on track to get everything done in time.
On a similar vein to that, we had a question come through about timelines and how important it is to have a clear timeline through honours. Obviously, that's something that you can reflect on throughout the year and adjust as you go, but did you find that helpful as kind of a guiding principle throughout the year, or the semester in your case, Emma?
Sorry, what was that last bit?
Or the semester in your case?
To have as a guiding.
How important was the timeline?
Oh, yeah, I think it was quite important. It was more like a writing timeline. So I had tried to do, I had done like a lot of work with my supervisor the semester beforehand, just to kind of really nail down the topic, because it took quite a while to narrow it down to something that was manageable in the amount of time we had. And then I had a lot of, so I kind of did a discourse analysis. So I looked at every single judgment in New South Wales and Victoria over the past decade, which had involved the scenario that I was looking at, which was domestic violence victims who kill their abusive partner. And I was analysing the language used by judges. So I kind of tried to get all of that, almost like data collection, done in advance, so that I could have just a really kind of extended period of writing and analysis. So I didn't really like use any particular tools or websites or anything like that. It was just kind of like an ongoing process of revisiting where I was up to in the broader scheme of my plan for my thesis, and how much time I had left, and kind of revising and adjusting it as I went. But I think it was just something to be aware of as I was going, to make sure you were on track. But also sometimes it was good because you could step back if you feel like you hadn't been productive in a week or whatever, step back and look at the broader picture and be like, no, I'm actually still doing all right.
Yeah, I guess I'll chime in here and just say that over-reliance on timelines can be a bit of a bad thing. My timeline that I wrote for myself was so over-ambitious that it's now given as a case study to new physics honours students on biting off more than you can chew. So certainly it's a really good exercise to sit down to plan out how you want to structure your research. You should have stretch goals, etc. But understand that research takes a lot longer than you think it will when you start honours, and that honours is kind of weird in that you just stop at some point. So certainly have a roadmap, have a detailed roadmap, but be kind to yourself and accept that you may not get through all of it.
So we've spoken a lot about challenges during the year, and obviously a way that we can kind of cope when those challenges arise is by having a really strong support network. How did you build and maintain those support networks during the year, and what kind of value were they to you?
Well, for me, because my honours is part of an ARC project, there's been multiple academics, in Canberra, in Sydney, overseas, that I've been able to contact, and be able to get sources from and bounce ideas off. So that's just been really useful as well. But it kind of goes back to what Mitch was saying. If you nurture these relationships, they'll be there for you when you need it. To go back to the question about timelines, I definitely agree with Matt. It's good to have timelines. I think they hold you accountable, but also be kind to yourself if they don't go there. And back to supervisor relationships, I think it's kind of good to be a little bit scared of your supervisor, because that means that you keep to the timelines. You never really want to be chased by them to produce a piece of writing. I think if you're always on the front foot, you're trying to impress them, it's part of a bigger picture than you, then that can create some kind of productive work. And especially, you don't want to get in your head about it. It's a collaborative experience. Ultimately, you can't be afraid of sharing your work with as many people as you can.
I can talk a little bit about support networks. I guess I kind of expected honours to, dominate my time. I thought I'd be locked up in my room or in the honours lab for a year writing this big piece of work and, doing the coursework as well. But I actually found that I had more time than I expected to, continue going out with friends or visiting family and maintaining that other part of my life. I think that really came down to just being able to, and this kind of touches on timelines as well, but I'd, at the start of a week, maybe write down a timeline for what I wanted to do that week, keep myself accountable, knock out these couple of goals. And then all of a sudden, you could have Friday night, Saturday off to recharge, reach out to those people that you've not talked to for a little bit, and just refill yourself with energy, and then kind of, write that to-do list, again, hit out your goals and kind of manage your time and your relationships that way.
That's a really good segue, Mitch, because we're getting a lot of questions around whether honours is as exhausting as some people say it is, and how you managed your work-life balance and also your coursework thesis balance throughout the year. So if anyone would like to jump in and offer some insight.
I think the reality is most people have to work while they're doing their honours thesis. Most people have casual jobs and that kind of thing. So it just goes back to managing time. I've seen some academics say that they think it would be ideal if everybody just didn't have to work during their honours year, but unfortunately that's just not how it goes. And maybe you can save up and get the last month of your thesis off work. That's what I'm planning to do, just so that I have a really good block of time to kind of really reflect on my writing. It's like everything. There is sacrifices, but I kind of agree with Mitch. It's a time for you to kind of realize, during your degree, you've probably done a lot of cramming. You've written some essays the night or two before. This gives you a kind of, you should be kind of smarter at researching and smarter at writing and smarter at planning by the time you do your honours, I think, so you can afford to take time off.
Yeah, I think the other thing to keep in mind, sorry, Sam. I was just going to say, I think the other thing to keep in mind is that usually a person's thesis will be the most long-term project that they have out of uni. And so it's important to give yourself that balance and to give yourself that time off, because you're not going to be able to keep going for such an extended period of time if you just burn out because you've staying up really late and working all weekend. So it's almost like you need a bit of time off and a bit of space away in order to be as productive as you need and to be able to keep going for the full period.
Yeah, fully agree with those points. I think I was drawn into the trap of always putting off the honours work because it was never really as urgent as the other stuff I wanted to do. And then that's what ruined my work-life balance and caused me to burn out at times and be really stressed at times because I left too much for too little time. It was such a classic honours experience. So just having that sort of steady cadence of breaking things down week by week and having a certain maybe even just allocating 5 or 10 hours of focus work per week to your honours. If you do that from the outset, then you should be sweet depending on your topic and stuff.
Great. We do have a question coming through specifically for Mitchell, but I think that it can probably be answered by the wider cohort. So we're wondering how you went about finding that gap that Mitch described earlier in the literature. Obviously, as an undergraduate, that can be something that's quite daunting to have to contend with. And a lot of people probably don't even know what that looks like. So I know that we've spoken a lot about reading prior to commencing your honours year and maybe talking about those things with your supervisor, but do you have any specific tips for our audience?
I guess I didn't have that experience in my first year. I thought I'd found some gaps or some interesting kind of ideas to pursue. And then when I talked to supervisors, they were like, yeah, that's been done. that's not original. You're not adding to the literature. I was like, oh, okay, whoops. I got pretty lucky, I think, this year. I was at work and they asked me to research panel data methods and kind of create a document of methods that people could use at work. And so I just, researched that and stumbled upon a hole that I kind of thought this must have been done already, and looked for it for a long time and realized that it hasn't. So it was, luck more than anything else. I don't think in your honours year you're really expected to find that hole in the literature. You hopefully have a good idea, but even if you don't have a strong idea, your supervisors, they're experienced researchers, they know where to look, and they're really the people that you should go to and talk to try to find where you can add to the literature. And I'll just end by saying kind of one of the very important lessons I learned quite quickly in academics and in my honours was that research and progress is really incremental. Very rarely do you get to jump ahead of the literature and come up with something completely new, like some new theorem or new model or whatever that barely ever happens. It's really taking other people's work and making small changes, making it more general, applying it to new situations. And for me, that felt quite disappointing when I started my honours journey, but I very quickly realised that that's kind of how academics and academia and research progresses. So it's a hard lesson, but an important one, I think.
Yeah, I think I'll just add to that don't feel like it's something you have to do. Like, if you're intimidated by the idea of having to come up with your own research questions, that's because it's actually a really big deal. Like, in my opinion, I think honours is training to answer good research questions. I think a PhD is training to ask good research questions, and I think that's much harder. So certainly don't feel bad if that's not something you feel ready to do, because you don't necessarily have to.
Yeah, but then, you go, Eleanor, sorry.
I was going to say quickly, sometimes the gap can come over time. You can realize the contribution of your work, as the months go on, and you can, from reading the literature, you can realize the kind of small nuance that you're making and you're arguing. So you don't need to kind of be aware of the gap you're filling from the outset.
And building on what was said as well, I'm fully agreeing that it's generally good to trust your supervisor and align projects with what they're recommending. But then I think it also is really important to try at least think about how you can align the project with what you're interested in and what your values are. And it doesn't have to be a binary thing of your project, your supervisor's project. It can be something in between. And I also fully agree with Matt that it's really hard to try and work out better research questions and stuff, and it's time consuming. But the process of doing that is also beneficial in itself. It's like a really rich learning experience of trying to test assumptions surrounding the research, not just within the research. So yeah, but also agree with Matt that I hope no one feels pressured to do that, because it is already a really demanding year, and trying to take on too much is often not the best approach.
So pivoting a little bit more towards the end of the year, we have a couple of questions about publication and how much extra work that requires on top of your thesis in order to get published in an academic journal, and whether that's easier if your supervisor is already publishing on the topic. And we might start with you, because I know that your honours thesis is forthcoming for publication soon.
Yeah, so I found it quite hard. So I managed to find an academic journal that would publish it, but it was more difficult than I had anticipated, because I kind of came out of honours feeling proud of it and feeling like I'd done a good job, and then sent it off to a bunch of journals and just proceeded to be rejected many times. I think part of the issue was I kind of just sent my thesis off as is, and for most journals, especially law journals, the length of my thesis was probably a bit too long. 8,000 to 10,000 words is probably ideal, whereas mine was 13,000. So I think it needed a bit more culling, which is a difficult process after you already feel like you've culled it as much as you can. But I think actually the key thing was after I had been rejected from a few journals, I went back to my supervisor and explained the problem, and he put me in touch with another academic who had published on a similar area. We culled the thesis a little bit, but it was quite similar to what I'd already submitted, and then we sent it to another journal. And it sounds bad, but I think having another academic's name on it really helped, because it wasn't too dissimilar from what I'd sent to the earlier journals. But it's almost like, especially if it's something that you've used for an undergraduate thesis, and you're aiming for kind of publications with professional academics, it does sometimes help just to have someone else's name on it, which is not the most, encouraging situation, but yeah, it helps get the outcome, I think.
Yeah, just following on from what Emma said, I think often in the sciences, it's a lot harder to write like a 5-page research paper than it is to write a 100-page thesis. Like compact scientific writing is a really acquired skill that you need to work hard at. So it's not really something that you learn on us. I think it takes quite a bit of work after. And I think there's also a lot of luck involved into whether your project pans out in a form that has interesting publishable results.
Yeah, it might be a little smoother in the humanities because the kind of form that your chapters take will take a little bit of tweaking to get into an article format. But, each chapter, I guess, for me at least, each chapter is quite distinct. I draw on a different source base, so I can see each chapter kind of becoming its own article if that's what I want to do. But I suppose for other people whose thesis is, the sum of all of its parts making a broader claim or argument, then it'll be a bit trickier.
We've already touched on this, but we do have a few more questions coming through about COVID and completing your honours year in lockdown or in a virtual environment. Does anyone have kind of any advice that they would give prospective students who are potentially being put off by those circumstances?
I mean, it's not guaranteed that the job market is any better. So it's just weighing up, what do you want to spend the year doing? And, to spend the year researching and writing something that you're interested in is not the worst way to spend a year, I don't think.
I'm going to say, I think economically the opportunity cost of doing your honours project actually decreases with COVID. It's not like you can go out and travel or go out and get a job, wages are going down. You may as well spend an extra year at uni doing the research. But yeah, I don't think doing it online impacted my experience too much.
I almost felt like it actually made me focus a bit more, because there's less, it's a bit depressing, but there's less opportunities to go out and socialize and be distracted. So in a way, you could take that as a positive. It kind of creates a good environment to be really, really focused on the one thing for kind of an extended period of time.
Yeah, this current lockdown has actually been good timing to get a lot of writing done for me.
Yeah, I mean, back when I did my honours, COVID was still a twinkle in a bat's eye somewhere, but I found the experience of being in the writing cave honestly quite similar to lockdowns anyway. You may find it's not actually that different.
Referring back to the Q&A, because we only have 10 minutes left, someone's asking whether if you could have done anything differently in your honours year having completed the experience, what would it be and why? So if we could all just kind of give one specific example.
Maybe one thing is just to consider a wider range of topics and a wider range of supervisors. Often it's sort of easy to find one that, oh, that seems good enough, I'll just do that. But if you just take the extra sort of 2 hours to think about a few more potentials, then you can find something that's way an order of magnitude better. And so I'll add another resource that might help you find another topic. I haven't used it myself, but I've heard other people found it useful. So in case it's just helpful for idea generation for topics, I'll add it in the chat.
I think the one thing I probably would have changed was paying a little bit more attention to my peers' projects, because you can learn a lot from them, and also they can learn a lot from you. And in some cases, you can actually get yourself on other people's publications by contributing good ideas. So One of my peers is a co-author on a paper I'm writing at the moment, loosely based on my honours work. So yeah, your peers are great. Your peers are very smart. Swap ideas with them.
We might move on then. Thank you for your insights. So we have someone wondering what is important in terms of getting a really good mark on a thesis project. Obviously, it's a huge question, but if anyone feels like they can offer any kind of delineation.
I think one thing that people worry about a bit too much in the sciences is having positive results. And really, I think the biggest contribution to marks for the thesis itself, at least in science honours, is the quality of your writing and scientific communication. My thesis was basically just a very eloquent, we tried really hard and this thing doesn't work. And I still managed to get the thesis prize out of that. So write well, put a lot of effort into writing. Even if your results fall to pieces, you can still get a really good thesis out of it.
On a similar vein, but in a humanities context, I think something that I found was, I think it's quite important to be able to explain what the value of your research is, and especially in humanities where it's not like you have a successful, unsuccessful experiment or, data or whatever. Even if that kind of the outcome or the ultimate conclusion that you reach isn't something that you anticipated, if you can find a way to articulate and communicate what does that mean to the area of research, that's almost like the way of clinching it, because you might have that already, but if you haven't laid that out for the marker or whatever, it might not be as apparent to them. And so I found that my supervisor really encouraged me and kind of almost had a higher view of my research than I did myself. So it kind of took someone encouraging me it's almost like you need to talk yourself up and talk up what the value is. But I do think that can help contribute to marks.
Great. We also have someone wondering how many hours per week you each spent on average doing research and honours work. Again, possibly quite difficult to quantify, but go ahead.
I can say that my experience, I'm not sure what the average hours would be, but it was often a couple of weeks of not doing that much, and then 3 days in a row of writing out 5,000 words or something, just doing a whole big chunk in a couple of days. And I feel like the reason for that is you do a lot of research and you do a lot of reading, but then you need to let your ideas kind of develop. And I'd spend, every moment kind of thinking, didn't really matter what I was doing. I'd be thinking about my ideas. And then all of a sudden, once they've matured and developed, you can just write them down. So yeah, some weeks I probably spent, less than 5 hours that week on my honours project. And there would have been other weeks where I spent more like 50 or 60 hours on the project. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's hugely variable. And maybe going, how many hours do I need to do is not always the best attitude to have. Because I think much more so than undergrad, you need to come in refreshed and you need to look after yourself and come in with a fresh mind, because some of the problems you're working on are going to be really hard and require a lot of creativity, and you're not going to be able to source that creativity without being well rested and fulfilled.
I might jump through to the last couple of questions. So someone from the audience is wondering what a good mindset is to go into honours and research with.
I'd say resilience and humility. It's, as I've said, it's kind of collaborative. You need to be not afraid of having your work read by your peers, your supervisor, etc. And you have to be prepared for it to change. I think when we usually do undergraduate and write a research essay, we hand it in and it's done. But with your chapters, unfortunately, they have to go through multiple rounds of revisions, and that's okay. And humility, because you kind of, for me at least, you recognized what a collaborative process it is, the people whose work you're building on, who you're communicating with. It's quite a nice feeling. And also to realize that a project is bigger than you, but also not all that you're defined by.
I would say that the humility is possibly the most important thing. And in particular, a willingness to ask dumb questions. I guarantee you that your supervisor's idea of what an honours student is capable of will be very miscalibrated, simply because their most recent memory of an honours student will be someone at the end of honours, and you change massively over the year. So your supervisors are going to assume that if you have a problem that you'll ask, and you just need to not be hesitant to ask something that seems dumb, because it's not. Like, if you're thinking it, everyone else is thinking it. So ask dumb questions until you run out of them. That's how you'll learn.
Say try to remain flexible and have an open mind. You'll start off at the start of the year with an idea of what your honours project is going to be. You'll probably map it out. You know, I'm going to write, this chapter, this chapter, this chapter. I'm going to argue these hypotheses, whatever. At the end, it'll be very different. You'll realize, different things were important as you work through them. You spend more time on different sections, and your ideas kind of morph. And that's great. That's just kind of through that research process.
I think another thing to add would be one thing I wish I did more with honours was sort of thinking more about what the year was going to be outside of honours as well. Like, I think to consider like what other projects in your personal life and outside of honours in uni and outside uni that you can do in that year, that can really help you be more humble and resilient in your honours research if you've got more diverse life.
Okay, we have a couple of minutes for the last question. What is something that you learned about yourself through undertaking honours that you maybe didn't realise previously, or a skill that you honed throughout your experience?
I can have a go at this. I guess my biggest takeaway from the whole honours year was that I now have belief that I can have an original thought, and not only can I have this original thought, but I can develop this thought into a theorem and then into a thesis. The honours is unique because throughout your undergraduate research, you write essays and you answer quizzes and do exams where there's a right answer. But when you're doing your honours thesis, you kind of have to find that right answer yourself. There's no one else, holding a marking scaffold there with all the answers written on it. So just the kind of belief that I could do that was my main takeaway from honours.
Yeah, I felt similarly to Mitch in that it probably gave me a lot more confidence in my own capacity for analysis, because it was kind of my first experience at university of being encouraged to kind of back your own point of view. Usually you have to find a source and back it up for everything that you want to say, but to kind of have the freedom to be completely independent in forming your own view was something that gave me a lot more confidence in terms of my research skills and my ability to almost like create something original.
Yeah, I would echo all of those. I also think that the process makes you a better reader and a better writer and a better communicator. So recognizing that you've grown in all those areas is always good too.
Well, I think that's all we have time for. It goes without saying that honours can be really challenging, but I think as we've learned from our panellists today, it's also incredibly rewarding from an academic, professional and personal perspective. So a big thank you to our panellists for your openness and sharing your experiences. This is definitely a panel I wish I'd had access to before my honours year, and I'm certain that our audience has derived a lot of value from your insights. Thank you to everyone for listening in and submitting your questions, and this recording will be made available online following the conference. So we hope to see you in other conference sessions throughout the week.